Welcome to part 31 in our series of videos on how to create a simple purchase order system using Blazor and C#. In the previous video, we established that Syncfusion PDF would allow us to generate a PDF document and save it to the server. In this video, we're going to return to the purchase order application and create and save a PDF of the purchase order. Once we've created and saved a PDF, we will extend the email function to attach the PDF purchase order to the email. This is an example of the PDF or kind of PDF of the purchase order that we'll be aiming for. It consists of a header section with a logo of the company placing the order and that company's name and address, the supplier's name and address, some information about the order such as the number, its date and who requested it, and then the body of the order, which consists of a separate row for each order line showing details of the code, description and so on, with a total at the foot of the grid here. At the bottom of the page we'll show the page number and the date it was created or printed on. So that's what we're aiming for. So let's make a start by opening Visual Studio and getting started on it. The first thing we need to do is to install the NuGet package for Syncfusion PDF. So as usual, we'll go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and Package Manager for Solution. And we want to browse and look for Syncfusion PDF. And the package we want is this top one, syncfusionpdf.net.core. So we'll install that. Just as a matter of covering everything, before I installed that, I did in fact check that there were no updates. So everything that was that needed updates, I gave updates to, and now there are no updates required. The other thing we'll need is a folder to keep these PDFs in. So if you right click on the solution, select add and add new folder, and we'll call it files. And another bit of housekeeping that I've done already is that we'll need another folder called media, and we need to put in there the logo that we're going to be using on the PDF. That can be any logo that you choose. To make life easy for me as I was developing this, I decided to add a button on the index page so that we could simply click a button and create a PDF, and then I'd be able to see what I'd actually created. So to do that, we'll add a PDF button to the index page. So select Pages, select Index, and down here on the toolbar items, we'll add a new item for a toolbar item that says PDF, and then we'll go down and add that to the toolbar click handler. So we've got methods for dealing with add, edit, delete, preview, email, and we want one down at the bottom now to handle the PDF. Right, so I think I've got that at the right level here. Yes, I have. So it's all at the same level. So I'll explain what this is going to do in a second, but we've got a few red squigglies under here. That's because we need to define a few things up at the top of the file. We're going to be using the PO line service because we'll be needing to pass to, where is it here, the PDF, create PDF, the order header and order lines. So far on the index page we've only needed the order header, so now we're going to need the order lines for the specific order that we've selected. We're going to be using file streams and memory streams. Both of those are going to use the system IO, and I think there's probably something else we need in there as well, but let's go up at the top. So first of all, we'll inject the create the PDF. We also need to inject the PO lines because we're PO line service. So let's do that under the PO header. And we're going to need the system IO for the file stream and memory stream. That's got a red squiggly under it because we haven't actually defined that class yet. So the other thing we're going to need is, at the moment we've got an enumerable for the PO header, but we want something similar for the PO lines. So we'll declare that there, and for the list, which we'll put it directly underneath. So that follows exactly the same pattern as we've used elsewhere for getting the purchase order lines. So if we look down here now, we should find that we've got nothing nasty going on other than the missing PDF, create PDF. Right, so what's happening here is that, first of all, I'm checking to make sure that the user has selected one of the purchase orders. We're then going to populate the order header object using the PO header get1 method. Then we're going to populate the order lines. Because we know the order header that we've got, we can pass that to the order lines by PO header and then change that, convert that I enumerable into a list. And this is the bit that does the main work. We're going to be creating a memory stream called PDF stream from this export service create PDF, and that's really the heart of all this. So we're going to be passing to that the order header and order lines, and then that's going to return a memory stream which we're going to save as a file. And to do that, we need to define a file name or declare a file name, which is the environment.current directory added to the files, that new folder we've just created, and then I'm going to give it a name of PO hyphen and then the actual order number and then .pdf. So that creates the file name we're going to be creating. That defines the file stream with that file name. It's create, write, and none. From the previous video, remember that create will always overwrite it, even if one already exists. We're then going to convert that memory stream to a byte array and then write that to disk. But this is the bit that does all the hard work, the export service create PDF. So what we need to do now is to create a new class, and we're going to call it create purchase order PDF. Now, I'm not quite sure where I want to have this, but data seems as good a place as any. So right click, add new class, and we're going to call it create purchase order PDF. And to save an awful lot of typing, I'm just going to copy in there the information we want, which is this, and it's very extensive. So what is this doing? This looks fairly horrible, but in fact it's fairly repetitive and is not too difficult to understand, and I'll try and go through it as best I can. What we want is a memory stream, and we're passing into it the PO header object called order header and a list of PO lines called order lines. Then we need to create a PDF document, and I'm simply following the examples and documentation in the Syncfusion PDF from the Syncfusion PDF documentation on their website. So there's a few things that may seem a little bit strange here, but they do work. So I'm creating an integer called paragraphs after spacing. That's just to give some spacing between paragraphs, and cell margins. All these items are in units of measurement called points, and they're not the same as pixels, and you get roughly about 550 points across an A4 page. So the first thing we have to do is define, having got a document is split into a number of pages. So first of all, we need to have to declare a page and then add it. Then I've got some settings for the page here. So the size, which I've set as A4, and the margins left, right, top and bottom. I've taken those as examples from the Syncfusion website. Now I've got an example of how this works. So let's have a look at that. This is how the purchase order is split. It's split into a number of sections. So at the top, we've got a header, and we want that to appear at the top of every page. So if the number of rows here extends for more than one page, we want that to be repeated at the top, and it'll be exactly the same information. Then we've got the body of the purchase order, and that will consist of a number of rows, or a grid with a number of rows with a total at the bottom. And at the bottom we have a footer, again, which will be repeated on every page, except it'll say, I hope you can see that, it'll say page 1 of 2 or 3 or 1, depending on how many there are, and the date the PDF was either created or printed. So that's the general layout. So we're looking at the header first. So let's go back and have a look at the header. So the first thing we need to do is to define the header. And there are two ways that items can be placed on a PDF. Well, but there are probably more than two ways. There are two ways that I'm using, either a rectangle or a point. A rectangle is defined by an X coordinate, a Y coordinate, a width, and a height. And so what I'm doing here is defining the bounds for the header. So I'm defining it as a rectangle. It's starting at 0, 0, which is the top left-hand corner of the page. I'm giving it the width of the whole of the page, and I'm saying the height is 200. These are 200 points. Then we define a PDF page template element of header, and we're calling it header, and we're giving it the bounds that we've just given it up here. So it's always going to appear at the top. And well, by definition, this next bit at the next line actually says is going to appear at the top. We can do something similar for footers, and we'll come on to that later. The logo, first of all, we give it define the logo name, file name, and we say where we can find it. So that's this environment.current directory media, which is the new folder we created, and that's the name of the file. It's a file stream. It's for open and read access only, and then we're converting it into a PDF bitmap. So what we do is define all these logos and bits of text and say, right, well, we want the logo in this position. We want this bit of text up here, this bit of text up here, and so on and so forth. It's fairly tedious, but it is repetitive. So once you've learnt the pattern, it's relatively straightforward. So we've placed the logo in the according to a point, which is x0, y0, which is the top left-hand corner. And we draw images using draw image, and everything has to be kind of prefixed by graphics. So we've got the header.graphics.draw image logo, top left-hand corner, and then we can define the size, so we can rescale our logo by changing the width and the height. So that gets the logo done. The next item is we're going to define the font that we're going to use for the company address. If we look over here, we'll see the company address is slightly bold. Or not slightly bold, it is bold. So we say that the company address font is Helvetica, it's size 10, and it's bold. We also need to define a string, PDF string format, and the string format allows us to align things. It also allows us line spacing and other items, but really I've only used it for alignment. So first of all, I say the string format.alignment is right aligned because I want all these addresses to be right aligned. Then we build up the address. So first of all, string text address text, sorry, is, and I've just defined it as Blazor code, which is the name of the company, and I've said header graphics draw string, which is different from draw image. I've told it which text to use. I've told it the font to use. The brush is the color. So I'm saying I want it black, and I want it in this rectangle. So I want it the top left-hand corner of the rectangle to be x0, y0, then the width, page width, and then the height. And I've said the height is going to be the size that we've got there. Now that might seem a bit strange. It seems strange to me, but it works, is my only excuse for using it. And then we want it right aligned. So that will place that section there will place blazorcode.uk there. We then move on to the next line, and I'm just using the same string, address text, 5 High Street, and I'm using basically a copy of the line above, except now I'm saying the top left is 14 points further down, and that is just enough to move it from there to there. And we go through with the rest of the address. The next bit is a bit of an interesting part of this section, and that is that we want the address to get rid of any blank lines that we have. We can't guarantee that the address is always going to be 5 or 6 lines long. So this will always have, I'm defining a string called supplier address, and I'm adding to that the supplier name. There will always be a supplier name plus environment.newline. That's effectively puts a carriage return new line after the supplier name. Then I'm saying if the supplier address one is not null or empty, add in the supplier address and another new line. If that doesn't exist, it skips it and we move on down to the next address line and so on and so forth. Now for this, I want the text alignment to be left. I want the font not to be bold, so the header font is Helvetica size 9 and it's regular. And then I'm going through this line here will print the whole of the supplier name and address. And that's going into a rectangle starting at X0, Y90, and then I've just got the page width and height and the string format, which is going to place it left aligned. So that puts this up here. The next thing I want is these order number, order date, and contact. So those are just text items. So that's these three items, which is I'm using the same header font. I'm actually saying what the text needs to be, and I'm putting it in various rectangles. Now, because I want it halfway across the page, I'm getting the X is the page width divided by 2, and then I'm incrementing it to move down the page. And I've said the width is also the client size divided by 2, but the height, I've got 18. I don't think that matters. I think that I've got a variety of it there. I've got 18, I've got the client size height there. It doesn't matter. So that will put the text there. And then the last thing I'm doing is actually getting the PO order number, converting it to a string and placing that in the, where are we? The rectangle, and I'm just making it 50 points further over from the original description. And then I've got one last thing, which I've got centered aligned, which is this, the actual description, purchase order. I've got it in a bigger font and it's bold, and that's going to appear here. So as you can see, it's repetitive. There's nothing too complicated about it. It's just a matter of determining what the text or string is that you want and placing it in the right place. It's a bit trial and error, to be honest, but it wasn't too bad. The body is a little bit more complicated. We're going to use a grid, a PDF grid, which is this section here in blue and light blue. It's got a header row and then a row for each of the order lines, and under it we've got a total. So what I'm doing here is defining a font, which is going to be Helvetica size 8, and to accumulate the totals, I've got declaring these three variables: the running net price, the running tax amount, and the running gross price. And I'm also defining a variable called bottom of grid, and that's because I want the total line to be the bottom of the grid, wherever that happens to be, plus some spaces. And then I've got an integer for lines per page. The problem arises is what happens if we've got more than a page full of order lines, and it's bound to happen. So one's got to handle it. And what we want to do is, if we have more than one page of order lines, we want the second page to have exactly the same heading as this. We want almost the same footer, but we want the second page again to have this heading at the top, and we want the total to appear on whichever is the last page. So first of all, we want to calculate how many pages we are going to need. So we have the number of lines per page, and we can calculate the page count by having the order lines dot count. So order lines is the object we're passing in. So we'll have the number of order lines there. Then you add the number of lines per page minus 1 and divide by the lines per page. And this relies on the fact that a C# integer division just effectively always rounds down. And by using this little trick, we will always get the number of pages that we need. If you don't understand it, just do an example. Just assume you've got, say, a line count of 75, and you've got 40 lines per page. You'll see that it works out. So here we are. We're on page 1. So we set declare a variable called page number and set it to 1. We also declare I, which is effectively the line number, and set it to 0. We need to deal with the full pages first, because obviously they're the ones at the beginning. If we haven't got a full page, we will deal with that a little bit further down. So we'll come to that in a second. So while the page number is less than the page count, so let's say we've got 2 pages. So page 1, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a PDF, declare a PDF grid, and we're saying that the cell padding left and right is the cell margin, which we declared at the very top, which I think was about 4 or 8 points. Then we're going to set up the columns and the alignment. So this has to be done on every page. So I've got that declared a bit further down. So go to definition. So what we do here is we create this PDF. We give each column a column name, and we give it a width, and then we add them to the grid. Then we say whether the alignment of the columns is left or right, and what I've done here is it default to the left, so I've only had to deal with the columns that we want on the right. Then we add a header row, and these are the descriptions that we have on the header row. Then we apply a built-in style, which is this grid table accent 1. It's a bit like Excel tables, but for the top row we want something slightly different, and this allows us to have it in bold, and it also inverts it so it appears white, and that applies the style. So that defines the grid. Then while the row number is less than the page number times the lines per page, remember that I starts at 0, which is quite convenient. We then, right, I'll go to, this is another tricky bit. I'll come back to that in a second. But what we do is then for each row, we add them to the grid, and we increment the running net price, the tax amount and gross price, and then we increment the row number, and then we go around again. Now this stuff up here, we've got to kind of handle one way or another. What would happen if the description extended beyond the space? And ordinarily, what PDF Grid would do is just word wrap it. And you can imagine the difficulty that's going to give us in calculating the number of rows. So whereas I've said we've got 40 rows per page, if suddenly a third of these started word wrapping, we'd have a problem and everything would go out of kilter. So the way I've decided to deal with that is that if one of these descriptions goes beyond the space available here, I'm going to effectively truncate it, and to indicate that it's been truncated, I'm going to add an ellipsis to it. So I've defined a string called truncated product code, and I'm just getting the product code, and I'm doing the same for product description. And then we've got this size f allows us to measure the length of a string. So I've said size f, the size of the product code is you divide it by the content font, stroke measure string, and then the item that you're measuring. So I've got the size of the product code at the size of the description. So if we deal with the product code first, we know that the product code column width minus the cell margins is, so the cell margins are 4. So we've said the column width is 70 minus the cell margins is going to be 62. So if the size of the product code width is greater than 62, I want to do this. I want to change it to truncate it with a maximum width of 62. So if I go to that definition, and I have full admission here, this is something I found on Stack Overflow. So get fitted string, we take the input and maximum width and the font, and we declare an output, and we go through this cycle here, which I'll leave you to read, but basically it's knocking one character off the end of the string all the time, adding on the ellipsis and then measuring the width. And while that is greater than the maximum width, it goes round again. So the end result is that we get a truncated product code or product description with an ellipsis at the end. So where are we? So that explains that little bit section of code. So we go round, and actually that wasn't right. We've got to keep an eye on which page we're dealing with. We're dealing with full pages here. So we go around filling up the grid. And when we filled it up, we have to draw it. So we do PDF layout result. We're defining this thing called result, and we're drawing the page. And the point at which we're pointing it is X is 0, and the paragraph after spacing is something we defined much further up there as I think it was about 8, which is the number of points below the header that we want it to start. And so if the page number is less than the page count, we add another page, and so on. So that deals with full pages, which in most cases won't be a problem. In most cases, we won't have very many pages, but we will always have a last page, i.e. those that will not fill up a whole page. So either they're 5 or 10 lines at the beginning of an order, the whole order, or they're the last 5 or 10 beyond the number of rows per page. So we go through the same process. We add a new page, we set the cell margins, we create the layout as we did before, and this time, while I is less than the order lines.count, so I might be coming into this as say number 41, we might have 50 odd lines, so while I is less than 50, we go through exactly the same as we did before, filling in the grid, and then when we filled in the grid, we do again exactly the same as we did before, but this time we have defined where the bottom of the grid is. So the bottom of the grid is the results last page, which is this thing, at the bottom. We then, as we've been going along, we've got running net price, running tax amount, running gross price. We could then convert those to strings and format them as currency. We say we want alignment to right. We've got a totals font, which we want to be Helvetica, size 8 and bold. And then we'd use the draw string method to place them in the right place under the right columns. So this needed a bit of trial and error, but I got there in the end. Then I want an order total description that I want to be aligned left. And I say where that needs to go, again in a rectangle. So that puts the order total there, but I want a line at the bottom as well. So I define a pen, color black, width 1, and I tell it where to draw it. So I'm going to draw the line x equals 0, y, which is the bit that really counts, is the bottom of the grid plus 20, so it'll just place it 20 points below the bottom of the grid. The width x, this item here, so that's, yes, this is x1, y1, x2, y2, which is the coordinates of the start and end of the line. X2 is the width of the page, which I found to be 515 points, and again it's 20 below the bottom of the grid. So that defines this section here. Then we've got the footer. We've got page number and printed on. So we defined a rectangle for the footer, as we did for the page header. The template footer is defined by the bounds, and we're having it at the bottom. I've defined a font of 7, slightly smaller, and I've defined a brush as black. And then I've said the string footer page number is page, and then we've got the page number and page count from further up the system. And I want it aligned centered, and I want it drawn within a rectangle. So that's what that does. And just to show that you can have it, I've also printed the date that the thing has been created. So I've got a string date printed, printed on, and I've got date time now to string, and then the format that I want. I want it aligned right, and I'm placing it in exactly the same rectangle as this one up here. So you can place text rectangles on top of each other, but you just have to make sure that the text doesn't actually line on top of each other. I've got it commented out, but the Syncfusion documentation has a different method of creating page numbers, and I thought I'd just leave this in here. It uses something called PDF composite fields. Feel free to try it out. It does work, and I left it in there for completeness. So that's effectively created the PDF. So the way to save it is using the memory stream, it saves it and closes the PDF document and returns the stream. That's it. And that, if we run it, right, so we've got our purchase orders. We've got a new button that says PDF. If I select one of the orders and click PDF, it's not very elegant. It just does it. I haven't put any toast in there to say what's happening. I'll choose another one. This one has got a great many lines on it. If we look at that, you see what I've done is I've got some long product numbers and long descriptions, and for quantity I have incremented it so that I've got 57 lines and each line has a quantity of its line number effectively. So if I save that and select order number 9, click PDF, that should have created the PDF. If we now go back to the application and under files, we've got PO3, which is what we expect. It's now printed, it says with today's date on it. So let's close that. And PO9, so purchase order number 9, and we can see that we've got an ellipsis where the description goes beyond one line, and we can see we've got 40 rows on the first page with a remainder on the next and the order total at the bottom there. And we've got page 2 of 2 on that, and page, a bug, page 2 of 2 on that. What has happened? Let me investigate. Right, I decided, I don't know whether this is going to work, but I thought I'd get rid of my version of the page numbering and put back the Syncfusion version of page numbering using a composite field, PDF composite field. Let's see if that works. Right, but I ought to do 3 to make sure it works with just one page. I'll try it again with 9. Remembering these will overwrite the existing files that were there already. Let's have a look at number 3 first. Page 1 of 1. So far so good. PO9. Page 1 of 2. Page 2 of 2. Okay, well that proves that we should be using the Syncfusion version of the page numbering, not my version of the page numbering. So bear that in mind. So that shows that the PDFs are working. All we need to do now is to change the emailing so that we can attach it to an email. So let's see how we can go about that. We can now close the purchase PDF. But on Razor, on the index page, on email, this is what we've got at present. and I need to change that because we're going to be, amongst other things, changing the body, saying please find attached PDF blah blah blah, and we want to pass the PDF file name to the email senders, either SMTP or SendGrid. Now to save time, I've got delete that and I'll replace it with this. If I missed, I'm going to get myself in a muddle here. Let's get rid of that. So if the text is email, we're checking that the user has selected one, and we're checking that the supplier email address isn't missing. Then we're going through the usual things, but here we're now populating the order header and order lines because we need to pass that to this memory stream as we did before. We're defining a file's name and setting it to 0. Then the file name, the reason that's put outside here is we'll be using it further down. So we're creating a file name which is files PO hyphen and then the selected purchase order number, and then writing it to the server as we did before. We're saying the email body says please find attached our order number, whatever. But here we're also adding file name and attachment name to the SNTP and SendGrid methods. And this is because the file name is the actual file name, which is what we're going to be attaching it, but the file we're going to be attaching, which is going to be something like PO-9 or PO-3, but we actually want it to appear on the email as purchase order number 9 or purchase order number 3. So those are the two items here. So having done that, we now need to amend the MailKit sender and the SendGrid sender to add those two file names, but it's a bit more, nothing's ever easy. It's not quite as easy as that. Hold on, I'm getting in a muddle here. Let's get rid of all that. And this is the MailKit one. So we're adding in the file name and the attachment name, but we're doing something different here. This is following the documentation for MailKit, and I'm using Body Builder to build up the body of the email and add the attachments. It seems to work. So that's the MailKit sender. If we have the SendGrid one, I'll just replace that as well. This is slightly simpler, but we're still adding in the file name and the attachment name, and this uses a slightly different way of attaching it. I think it needs to be, the file name needs to be converted to bytes and then to base 64 string, and then we can attach it. Again, I've simply followed the documentation. So that should mean that we can now email it. Now, having done that, we don't really need our toolbar item for the PDF. So I'm just going to comment that out for the moment. I'm not going to get rid of the toolbar handler for PDFs just in case I need to reinstate it if there's a problem, but we should now be able to email it. So let's try the application once more. I'll save it and run it. There are our orders. Let's have a look at number 9, just to check where I'm sending it to. It's going to me at Outlook. I'm going to change that to Blazor code. And number 3, where's that going? Yeah, that's going there as well. Okay, so let's send them. So highlight it, email, toast to say that the message has been sent successfully. Number 9, toast to say it's been sent successfully. I'm using EM client, so let's try that. And there they are. Order number 3. And it's got an attachment. So please find attached our order number 3. I can open it. Oh, there it is. Or we can have a look at order number 9. And there's that. So that all seems to be fairly successful. It was always my intention when starting off that we should attach a PDF of the order to an email. And this has surprisingly been, I think, almost one of the most difficult parts of this. So it is with some satisfaction that I find that we can actually do that. I think that pretty much concludes what I'm doing with this simple purchase order system. I think it does pretty much what I wanted it to do. We can create purchase orders, we can create suppliers, we can create products, we can handle the tax. So I think I'm fairly satisfied. If you've got any comments either about this particular episode or any of the other episodes, please leave them in the comments below. The code for the changes for this particular episode I will put in the description, and there's an accompanying website, https://blazorcode.uk, where you can also see all the information regarding this project. I might get round to putting the whole code for the project either on GitHub or attached to the website. So keep watching, or don't keep watching this, because this might be the end. Have a look on the Blazor Code website, or look on the description, because I'll put any information about the code in the description when it happens. That's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll maybe be back with a slightly more ambitious project in the not too distant future. Thank you. Goodbye.